Well, on Newsroom Africa, Channel 405. Thank you for joining us as we connect you and bring you a little bit closer to the world. You can also stay in conversation with us on Twitter at Newsroom405 using the hashtag Newsworld. It's time now for our Africa Wrap. We do this every week. We look at all of the biggest stories happening across the continent. And election officials in Ethiopia's ethnic Sidama region are counting votes from a referendum that many expect will approve the creation of a new federal state. Residents in the Congolese city Beni have turned their anger to the United Nations for failing to protect them. And meanwhile, Guinea protests have turned deadly as thousands protest a constitutional amendment. Also, police have broken up an opposition rally in Zimbabwe as frustrations over the stalled economy grow. We have analyst Jamie Mighti in studio with us. Jamie, as always, thank you for joining us and welcome to Newsworld.
Pleasure to be here.
Ethiopia seeking, well, not Ethiopia, well, in Ethiopia we have the Sidama tribe. They're now seeking self-determination. Maybe let's just take a few steps back. And how did we get to this point? We know that Ethiopia has many ethnic tribes, over 80 in fact.
Yeah. So I think the decision to make Ethiopia an ethno-federal state in 1994 is what has created a lot of the boiling tensions. Because, you know, there are three federations in Africa. You've got South Africa, you've got Nigeria, and then you've got Ethiopia. So South Africa, as everyone knows, has got this loose federal structure, but it's not based on tribal lines. Nigeria also is not exclusively based on tribal lines. So whilst you may have some areas like Port Harcourt and Owerri, which are more one particular tribe, you do have this tribal mix within the states. However, Ethiopia took a very ethno line, and that has created the seeds of divisions. So when you look at the situation as it stands, you will hear that people are saying that we have been fighting for this for 100 years. This is the Sidama tribe, and they represent 4% of the population of 105 million people. So for a very long time they've been pushing for this, but under Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister, he's actually tried to pacify the dissent by allowing for this referendum to happen. The danger is, however, that other tribes are looking at this and saying, we also want now to have our referendum. And really, the issue is, when you have your state status, you can collect taxes, you can, you know, secure your own region, and you have certain rights that you wouldn't necessarily have outside or when you're not a particular state. So this is what the people were saying. They were saying, we don't have agency over our own lives. We want that agency like the other tribes.
They will have this agency over their lives. But to what extent will the government also have control over this region or influence?
Well, I mean, the government, it works kind of like America, right? You've got the federal level, then you've got the state level. So in South Africa, we don't have as pure independence between the states that happens in Nigeria, in America, places like that, where states have a lot of control and autonomy over their education system, etc. And this is what the Sidama was saying they wanted. So it does weaken the control of the state, of the federal level, when the states are established. And there's still a lot of ethnic tensions. So the question is, hasn't this opened a doorway to a slippery slope? You remember Abiy Ahmed just won this Peace Award. His actions
power in the region. I mean, this is also being seen as a test for him. Let's you mentioned ethnic violence, ethnic tensions. I mean, one could argue that this is obviously a result of colonization many years ago when you think of ethnic violence and tensions. The point that I'm trying to get you is, do you think that these we're seeing it increasingly now. You know, we've seen in Cameroon also where you know, they may be granted autonomy, the English-speaking region, and we're seeing this happening. I mean, we've spoken many times about the amount of uprisings happening in the region in terms of protests. You know, we've touched on Sudan, we've touched on many parts of the continent, actually many parts of the world, how people are rising up. And I mean, what do you, in your own opinion, and is this a good thing? Is this when people seek this autonomy and this separate or self-determination from a country?
So look, I think this, in the short to medium term, will pacify the dissent that has come out of the Sidama region, you know, because the protests were getting more viral, they were getting more violent as well. But I do think that in the long term, this could create tensions because, as I said, there are other tribes which are looking at this saying, well, if you gave it to them,
Yes.
why don't we get it? And everyone can see that the pathway towards getting a state is through violence.
But this referendum and the vote has been fairly peaceful. I mean, they've been.
No, I mean, but there was violence prior. You see,
Yes.
the violence is what almost created this no-go area for the Prime Minister, because he could no longer prolong the fact that the Sidama region wanted to have a referendum on this. So what I'm saying is that it could create a path for other tribes to say, if we make the region ungovernable, then we will get our own agency as well. Now, if you look at the Ambazonia claims, which is what the Anglophones are trying to do in Cameroon, I think it's also an issue of we've been ignored, and now we want to have a certain amount of agency, and this is what's happening there, and Paul Biya has been suppressing it. I think globally there is a trend towards what we call tribal thinking, where people are looking at their particular group and saying, you know, to hell with this broader collective, we are the game in town, we need to take care of our own interests, and we need to fight for our interests to the exclusivity of others. I think it's an indication of the fatigue which is happening in the globalized system, where it's very difficult for states to distribute resources as widely as they could, because obviously we are all in a system where China gives us the goods and we just resell them to each other. And then you're not going to be able to properly grow your economy in that kind of a context, and that's where we are.
All right. I mean, you mentioned earlier this perhaps could open a Pandora's box. Other regions, you know, seeking their own statehood. I mean, but Sidama tribe, they're a fairly bigger tribe compared to these other tribes. I mean, so that's also one of the reasons why they've managed to be so successful and reach this referendum vote. Do you think it would get? I mean,
well, they're 4%, right? And they're
like, bigger compared to the rest of the tribes in the region.
Exactly. 4% is not a laughing matter when you're dealing with a population of 105 million.
One of the largest populations in the continent.
Exactly. Second, I think, to Nigeria. So if you're looking at size, 4% is big, but so is 2%. So is 1%. You know what I mean? So there's a danger there that as a result of that, you could end up in a situation where Abiy Ahmed keeps having to deal with secession movements or these ethno-nationalist calls. And it's really going to make it difficult for him to maintain peace, which was part of the criticism around why maybe this is not necessarily the right direction to take. But as we can see, now the ball is rolling. It's only for time now to tell.
When can we expect results? I mean, I think
sometime next week we'll know.
Yeah. I mean, I would have thought it would have probably happened by the end of this week.
We'll see. I mean, maybe by Monday we'll see. It's unclear.
Okay, let's look at the Democratic Republic of Congo now. We know that you know, there's been lots of tension in the area, lots of conflict in the area. MONUSCO's main aim, that's the UN peacekeeping mission in the region. Now they have come under fire for failing to protect civilians. The civilians are angry. They're angry at MONUSCO. They're saying, listen, the rebels are here. Your job is to protect us. This is what you're doing. Has MONUSCO failed? Have they failed the civilians in Congo?
I think it's very important for us to all recognize that the eastern part of that area is quite ungovernable. You know, we're dealing with an area where it's mostly jungle, it's mostly areas which don't have sophisticated road systems, etc. It was always going to be a challenge to protect civilians in those particular areas, which is why that part of Central Africa as a whole is very difficult to normalize, because for a very long time it was underdeveloped. And now, as a result of that, rebel groups, militias, etc., they can operate quite effectively in the jungle, because it's very difficult to pinpoint where people are at any given moment.
Surely the peacekeeping mission is then failing, and then one would beg the question, what are you doing there? What is your mission?
Well, peacekeeping in that region is always going to be difficult so it's almost as if there needs to be more development in those areas. But now, how do you develop the areas when they're basically controlled by the rebels? How do you move around, especially now when you've got a situation where you're dealing with Ebola, you're dealing with rebels, and all of those problems are compounding. You know, so you've got a security issue, you've got a health issue, and you've also got a resource issue, because how do you get enough people to do what needs to be done, not only in terms of security, but in terms of healthcare? And then you're dealing with a bilingual system where some people are speaking French, some people are speaking another language, English, some people are speaking, you know, their local languages. All of that makes it very difficult for international teams to be able to come in, do accurate intelligence, and be able to actually secure those areas.
You mentioned all of that. You mentioned all of the compounding issues. The fact that it's in such an isolated area in the east. Are those the reasons why these attacks are just increasing and rebels have managed to maintain this stronghold?
Well, I mean, rebels have been able to maintain those areas for a very long time, partly because of the isolation, the difficulty to reach, and it's prime ground for guerrilla warfare. So until there is maybe a more aggressive approach, Rwanda has always been willing to offer its military because they have problems which come from those particular rebel groups when they attack Rwanda. So there may be need for a coordinated attack on the rebels, as opposed to a peacekeeping effort where you are really just trying to maintain perimeters to contain them and keep them away from civilian populations. But as I stipulated, you remember in Vietnam, it was very difficult for the Americans to win because they didn't understand the terrain, and the terrain was a difficult terrain to work in. Unfortunately,
one of the key factors, actually.
Yeah, we're talking about the jungle here, and it's going to be a very complicated situation to unravel simply because of the nature of the
Guinea.
terrain.
Jamie, I don't want time to run away with us. Let's quickly look at Guinea. A couple of weeks ago, we spoke about this. President Alpha Conde, obviously seeking another term, and as a result of this, he's trying to change the constitution so that he can seek another term. The last time we spoke, we thought perhaps maybe protesters would back down. But it seems they're not backing down, and it also seems that President Alpha Conde is using force.
Yeah, so the death toll has risen. It's over 20 right now. And I think it's important just to understand that there's a phenomenon in Africa which is quite problematic, is that these presidents, when they reach the end of their terms, they want to change their constitutions so that they can increase. And I think this is what
we see this in Uganda.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of countries. I made a list. You've got Burundi with Nkurunziza, you've got Cameroon with Paul Biya, you've got Chad, Idris Deby, you've got Uganda with Yoweri Museveni. You've got, actually, there's a long list. I could have gone up to 15 different African presidents who have tried to manipulate, even good countries like Rwanda. There's been a situation where someone reaches the end of what is constitutionally allowed, and then they start playing the game to try to change the rules so that they can stay on. It looks like the people have no appetite for this at this particular moment. And that's because, it's challenging to live in Guinea right now. You have conflict, occasional conflict between Libya and Sierra Leone. It's a population of 12.7 million, and the poverty levels are too high. So people are looking at the president saying, listen, you haven't actually done anything of value for us, and here you are wanting to go for a third term. And that's why the opposition movements have been protesting. Unfortunately, the response from the state has been one of repression and suppression, and people have been killed.
Well, there you have it. Our analyst, Jamie Mighti, joining us in studio, unpacking some of the biggest stories across the continent from this past week. I think another story that definitely deserves some attention, my colleague, Matsepela Malloy, standing by, she'll unpack this, is Zimbabwe. We've seen in the past week supporters of the opposition were waiting to hear an address from opposition leader Nelson Chamisa. Police, were they heavy-handed? We've seen increased vicious attacks by police on protesters. We are aware of Zimbabwe's economic crisis, but perhaps they should also focus on the political crisis. Stay tuned to Newsworld.